they will, face the heat island effect very much because one, their own houses are made up of usually tin sheet or AC sheet roofing, which ensures that, the temperature inside the house is almost 5 to 6 degrees higher than what it is outside. Hi, my name is Bijal Brambhatt and I am the director of Mahila Housing Trust, and you are listening to Understanding the Future podcast.
Hello everyone, I'm Puneet Gandhi, Senior Associate with the Climate Center for Cities at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, and welcome to the Season 3 of Understanding the Future podcast. I have been working and studying in the field of sustainability and climate change for more than 8 years, and I have realized that I have a lot of questions on how we can build cities in India that are more climate focused. With Understanding the Future podcast, I interact with experts, entrepreneurs, and government officials to understand what it takes to bring all the different solutions to the ground, as well as how can systemic changes be developed on ground. We will further anchor all the topics being discussed with different skill sets required. This will help us understand the future of cities and future of work in Indian context. If you are tuning in for the first time, do check out our previous episodes. Also, don't forget to check out the Climate Practitioners India Network, a members-led solutions-oriented platform for climate practitioners across India. And join it through the show note. Hope you enjoy the podcast.
Hello, I'm your host Puneet Gandhi, and today we have with us Ms. Bijal Brambhatt. She is the director at the Mahila Housing Sewa Trust. She will help us understand about urban poverty and climate resilience. Welcome to the show, Bijal.
Thank you.
So while we are diving down into the topic, let's first try to unfold what do we exactly mean by urban poverty. What are we looking at when we specify that about urban poverty?
To me, urban poverty is something that manifests mostly in the form of slums. So it's very visual, and you see these big informal urban settlements, which show in the form of slums where you do not have, access to services like water or sanitation, where you have social and political marginalization. Your quality of life is worse. Communities are unsafe, and where looking at COVID very recently, more prone to pandemic because they are extremely dense, and they are not hygienic. And then, of course, for women, there is this dual burden of the care. I think the biggest manifestation of urban poverty is in the form of urban informal settlements, which are slums.
Yeah. Okay, and if we are trying to then segregate it from the larger perspective of let's also define what or let's also give a context, not define, but give a context of when we are looking at poverty in India in general. What does that mean, and how does it differ when we are looking at it from the urban perspective? Because those are different kinds of poverty, if I'm not wrong.
So I think in general India, I would sort of think of rural India because India was still now considered to be predominantly rural. I think the way the rural poverty differs from urban poverty is that, rural, the quality of life is much better, although, probably the income levels may be lower as compared to urban areas. There is a general comfort level. There is more homogeneous communities living. Socially, communities are very close knit as compared to urban areas. And although dwellings and residences in rural areas may be kacha, essentially, as we call them, it may be semi-pakka in the urban, but the quality of life is much harsher. So it's much denser in the urban. It's much more hot because of tin sheets and AC cement sheets that we keep using in the informal slums. And we are more prone to evictions by the government and by the private sector. No access to services. Although you may not have access to services in rural, However, the environment is much better, quality of air is much better as compared to what it is in the cities nowadays. So, urban India may give you a marginal increase or opportunity of income security. However, the quality of life is much, much harsher in urban India as compared to rural India, primarily because of, lack of access to land and housing.
Okay, and yeah, that's true. But again, I think somewhere down the line we also realize that urbanization is now increasing quite a lot, and that also means it's more and more people are coming from rural areas to urban areas. And how does that kind of what are the opportunities that they are looking at while they are shifting here? What are the things that attracts them to this side? Uh, to come to the urban area to make sure that they can make their life here, because I do understand that it is much more difficult here in terms of quality of life, but I'm sure that they also have certain needs that they are looking, and they give that a bit of more priority.
I think there is some sense of more comfort level with incomes, probably more opportunities of finding jobs or businesses, small businesses. The second thing is that it is definitely aspirational because it sort of pulls you out of your comfort zone when you are in the rural, closer to your family, very close knit communities, and here you are much more exposed to the world, to probably more opportunities, and that really pulls you out of your comfort zone. But at the same time, it will, give you more opportunities in terms of income generation, and probably also it is much more aspirational as compared to rural.
Yeah. Okay. And so when they come out of their rural area and they are picking up jobs over here, what kind of different roles do they take up? What kind of different jobs do they generally get in? So I'm sure there are multitudes of those jobs, but if you can highlight certain major jobs that
So I
anyone
think
takes.
probably it's more for the informal sector and the poor who come to the urban areas. They are working more in the informal economy. And when I say informal economy, it's an economy where you don't have a fixed employer-employee relationship.
Yeah.
So this is basically poor who are working in industries, in factories. So as primarily as daily wage workers, and people become vendors, they become producers, very small manufacturing, production, home-based production that happens in your house. They also are, many of them, especially women, become home-based workers. They also become service providers, like, for example, hand cart pullers or head loaders or construction workers are all people that provide their services. Uh, uh, so, yeah, so primarily those kinds of jobs. So I think essentially based on our experience, we have classified them into four categories, which is service providers, as I mentioned, vendors, home-based workers, producers, yeah, daily wage earners, yeah.
Okay, that does make sense. That broadly does help us in classifying how do their work styles now change over here. Because I'm assuming from rural, when they're coming, either they would be employed in some form of industry or they were in agriculture at that point. And this is how they are shifting towards over here. And do we have some kind of information also on the lines, or some kind of studies that you would be part of or have read into, which helps us understand where what is it generally the male or the female, or how does the movement happen from rural to urban? Because that is something I feel uh, just because the male in the family is coming to the urban, the whole family shifts, or they try to send back money back home, or how does that function?
So I'm a practitioner, and
Yeah,
I have not read any studies that really actually unpack the process of,
yeah,
or at least the features of migration. But whatever I have understood from my practice on the ground is that, there are usually migrants who, mostly males initially, who come to cities and, in search of jobs, and they would essentially rely on their own community networks. So, for example, in a city like Surat, where you have a lot of migrants, you will find specific areas where there will be migrants from Bihar, and some specific areas where there will be migrants from UP, and then others from Maharashtra. So basically, using their community networks, other males who have already migrated, they would, come here in search of jobs, of work, and choose to stay within their community networks in, like slums, single room slum households where a lot of 6, 10, 8 people reside together, sharing the costs initially, just so that, the economic burden is much lesser before they start actually earning and contributing to their families. I think on an average for 6 to 8 years, they keep, sending money back home after earning, and, spend significant time going back home. Now, slowly over a period of time, after 6 to 8 years, that starts changing. Males get married, they then would like to bring their female folk back to where they are staying in the cities, and that's when they would actually start finding housing which is, separate from like what we call usually group housing, and then they would start, establishing themselves and then going for their identity and their credentials in urban areas, like getting an Aadhaar card from the urban address, or probably social security, like the public distribution system card, etc. Then slowly starts becoming urban. But I think on an average, almost a period of 8 to 10 years before that happens.
Okay, that's.
But sometimes we have also seen, and what has emerged actually as a feature of rural India that I was unaware of. Very recently, we started working with homeless in the city of Ahmedabad, where we are headquartered, and we have done a research study with them, and we understood that some migration, very less percentage, happens due to the caste and class politics in the rural areas. So there are families who have absolutely fled the rural areas just because of the higher class Thakurs or Kshatriyas actually oppressing them. To the extent that they have to flee the rural areas to ensure that they are able to live. So some of the very recent homeless have started emerging like this, and then they just sort of migrate with families and stay here on payments essentially initially.
So that's quite an interesting. I think it would be very difficult for study to find such kind of anecdotes as well, or such kind of trends to figure out this is over a given period of time. But so when now the female population is also coming up, does it become generally much more on the lines that they are also the bread earners now, and or do they custom more towards staying at home and making sure everything is all right?
Initially, what I have seen in migrants, very new female migrants, especially from some of the backward states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Odisha, women do work because poverty compels them to work. So it's mostly the poor women who are working always. But then they use their house as their workplace. So they will undertake economic activities which are basically out of their house. So, economic activities like kite making, for example, or mala making, or, stitching, or rolling biddies in the case of Madhya Pradesh, states like Madhya Pradesh. Essentially, they start with those kind of activities, or probably also doing a lot of the back-end jobs, supporting their husbands. For example, if there is a pani puri wala, all the production of the the food that goes into food articles into the pani puri is done by their wives at home. But it's all unpaid then and goes unnoticed. And most of the time, the women are also not aware that they have a economic role to play because they consider 9 to 6 or 10 to 5, salaried jobs as jobs. So when you talk to them, they won't say that they are working or contributing economically into the family.
And this absolutely is something that unpaid labor is quite a big thing. I feel, in this whole sector as well. What any experience or any examples which you can give, which has actually shown up something on these lines, that how they were able to understand more about that their work is also more fruitful to their whole economic condition.
There are it is a trend, so it's not one-off incident. So usually when we go into areas like Surat, which are very heavily migrant, and there are families which have, women who have recently migrated, we just go out and ask them because one of our trust also is to work with poor women who are economically active. So we just go out and talk to them, and then the first question you ask them is are they working, and the answer obviously would be no. And while they are still talking to us, they are doing something which is either they are threading a mala or they are sort of tying a lace or stitching a garment, but they would still say that they are not working. So then we will have to slowly talk to them, take some time out, and make them realize, sort of prod them to be able to get them to say that they are working and they are contributing, and although they may earn, because their income is basically not well, it's not that constant, it's not on a fixed basis, so they may earn in a week, they may earn in a day, they may not, then get paid in a month, because it's based on how and when your employer actually collects the finished goods from you from the home, because all home-based workers will have a middleman who gives them the raw material and comes and collects the finished goods, and they will not actually see the main employer. So it takes real, some time, like half an hour of conversation before even they would acknowledge that they contribute something to the economy of their households.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's quite a task for them to also realize this whole process. But so now when we come to the climate aspect of this whole urbanization, how are the people in slums or people who are more marginalized affected by the growing challenges of climate change? What are some of the things that have been noticed on the ground?
So obviously, because you are poor and slums are the solutions that you find, because slums are places where no one else who has good amount of moderate amount of income would choose to stay. They come at a price which is affordable to the poorest of poor. So basically, they are on all topographically vulnerable areas, mostly low-lying areas. And so these areas usually get flooded very easily, are worst hit by cyclones because of the way they are lying in. So, for example, if you are traveling in a train, most of the time you will see that as the railway station approaches near the railway line, you will always see, the slums lined up. And now the reason the slums come up there is, by law, you are supposed to keep a certain distance between the railway track and before you can actually start staying or have some construction. And that area is hazardous completely because the train, is passing by and you do not maintain the distance. But that's a no man's land in some sense, because nobody will come and evict you because you are staying in so much proximity to the railway track that your lives are really exposed to the dangers. And so that's where they will go and stay, because that would be available cheapest. They would pay to a local goon who would charge and would allow them to stay there on a land which does not belong to the goon, it belongs to the railway. But they will pay and they will stay there, and just stay there because it comes so cheap that they are exposing their lives or their children to this danger. So when climate change actually hits, what happens is that some prominent features of climate change are now going to be that flooding is going to increase, heat
Yeah.
is going to increase in communities across global South, India being one of the major countries. So with increased flooding, they'll be more prone to disasters. They will, face the heat island effect very much because one, their own houses are made up of usually tin sheet or AC sheet roofing, which ensures that, the temperature inside the house is almost 5 to 6 degrees higher than what it is outside.
Yeah.
And secondly, you also cannot afford cooling solutions like the air conditioners in your houses. So you are going to be more vulnerable. Epidemics and pandemics are going to increase because uh, because of the flooding and the unwanted precipitation that we are going to face due to climate change. And so
Yeah.
you will see that, the nature of sort of illnesses in terms of dengue, chikungunya, malaria are going to increase across the global south. And slums are going to be the sort of the initial points of genesis from which this will happen because water gets flooded and becomes stagnant in the in the slums because of the kind of topography it is. So again, they are going to be more vulnerable so far as climate change. So they are the communities who actually contribute the least, but are going to be the most at receiving ends of the effects of climate change.
Okay. And so, what are some of the case examples which have helped in where a built environment, what kind of built environment can be developed for this society then, especially the urban poor, that they don't face such kind of challenges? What are some of the measures or examples or case studies across the world that have been taken up for the same?
So we have actually been doing quite a lot of things, working on heat resistance, heat adaptation for the poor, for to ensure that their settlements do not get flooded or probably are less prone to vector-borne disease, etc. So poor tend to sort of build incrementally much more in their housing. So by incrementally, I that they'll invest once and do like a wall, then probably invest a second time and then do the roofing. So over a period of time, they will develop their housing, which becomes better over a period. So when they are doing this, how do they use technologies and materials which are one, not only aspirational because they do want it to be aspirational, but at the same time help them. So it has to be aspirational, it has to be affordable, it has to be user friendly and accessible to them very easily. So such kind of technologies, for example, we have been promoting cool roofs in the in the incremental housing that our members have been doing. Then we have also been advising them on passive design. So, for example, one of the features of our housing, especially in rural areas, used to be that we used to have projections, shading projections in the form of veranda, which is now disappearing in the urban built form, or even in the slums. So that used to actually help to reduce the onset by 1 to 2 degrees. So by reviving such features, which are low cost, but at the same time support them in decreasing the heat. For example, helping them to understand what a high flood level in their area is, and when they invest into their own housing, they sort of construct the plinth level at height that even if the area gets flooded, the water would not come easily into their houses. We do train them to identify larvae of malaria or chikungunya and dengue, and during the monsoon seasons they conduct specific drives in their areas to identify these larvae because we have trained them scientifically. So we have been doing doing this with the poor in the incremental construction. On the other hand, for the affordable housing and the Housing for All program, which is being undertaken by the government of India, we have been advocating that how the nation takes up housing, which is, less heated, looks at the thermal comfort and is much more energy efficient than what they used to build earlier. Because, the government on one hand is on a drive to electrify cities up to 100%. And, urban areas also do not have space at the household level to set up renewable energy equipments. So that is the challenge. But those are some of the issues that we have been working with the government also for affordable housing.
Okay. Yeah, because I feel somewhere, I'm not sure if it's a solution for all, but at least for good amount of people, affordable housing might act as a good way in which a lot of these climate parameters that they are affected by they can also be mitigated. Surely we will have to still take care of urban heat island because these are going to be concrete buildings, which might be better than tin sheets, but on a large scale, we will have to look at urban heat island as how to solve it. And somewhere again, cool roofs and passive design that you are working on might be helpful to make sure that, okay, these buildings are still more sustainable. And how's the adoption of that in the community? How do you see that adoption coming up?
I think it's very well taken, but you need a lot of education. So, and the education is not one time. You have to keep reiterating because ultimately it has to translate to a behavior change, which is a very, very difficult thing to do. I think
Yeah.
also the challenge with the poor, if you may understand, is that they think very short term. So, climate change
Yeah.
still for them is, when we started talking to them, was an act of God. So these untimely precipitations or, cold waves or heat waves were still an act of God to them.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we did was to demystify the science of climate change in a very, very simple manner. And so we did develop very strong communication material. What they tend to think short term because, if you have no resources, monetary resources, you always look at your short term needs. So, for example, how will I eat my next meal? How will I, get the fees to educate my child? Are always the short term needs that they are focused on. So, to
Yeah.
get them to think long term and invest in that sense is really, really challenging. And you have to keep reiterating the education that you undertake, along with, of course, looking at technologies or initiatives that I said can be, so we've come up with 4 criteria for them to be successful with the poor. As I said, one is that they do have to be aspirational, they have to be affordable, they have to be user friendly, and they have to be easily accessible. So those technologies or initiatives will work with the poor. But what really got them in our case to invest was the fact that they were very clear that they did not want their children to live the lives that they are living currently.
Okay.
And when they understood that their children are going to become increasingly more and more vulnerable because of climate change, and lives may be even more, worse than what they are living now, that's what really got them interested to learn more about the subject, and then started thinking of investing.
Okay. And because I feel it's also this is where the importance of the whole long-term education, long-term benefits of everything that they are doing today might come up for them, and that would be important. Uh, so overall, is there a good amount of retention they see in affordable housing as well? Or because initially I do remember, again, I'm not from this field, so my knowledge might be wrong. So they would again give out such affordable houses on rent and everything to make sure that their short-term incomes are derived off and they would move to another place or slum. Would that scenario still happen or would it not happen always?
So it really depends on the the level of urbanization. So if you, for example, I have seen affordable housing sites where people 30% of the people have gone back or rented the houses allocated to them. So a lower percentage would be 30, but
Yeah.
on a bad side, it would go as high as 50%.
Yeah.
The issue is that we do not have, I have at least not come across a comparable statistics for the middle class or the higher middle class. So you also have the middle class or the higher middle class actually investing into housing and then renting it out. So people do
Yeah.
buy housing in the middle class and higher middle class for as investments,
Yeah.
just to make rent income. So I do not see why it is so being criticized for the poor if they want to utilize it
Yeah.
as a means of as an asset building or a means of income. And
Yeah.
what are the rates in the middle and higher class? I'm not sure. If I would see a site which has 30% non-retention, to me it's a good site.
Okay.
But if it goes as high as 50%, probably we do have to think. And there have been
Yeah.
odd cases where it is high as 50%, but there have been cases where it is very, very low.
Okay.
Also to the tune of 25 to 30%. So this is a very debatable issue.
Okay. No, I absolutely get your point, because it's eventually, as you mentioned, that it's a change in their thought process as well, the behavior change that needs to come in from the long term perspective thinking that they need to bring in. And again, they also have to make their ends meet eventually. That is why they are in this urban area. So what are the different kinds of, so when we are developing affordable housing, is there any specific financial instruments we are talking about that help them out? How does that help them? And can you elaborate on that?
So as I said, the maximum amount of housing happens by the poor incrementally. Just to give you a statistics, if you have 10 houses being constructed in India today, two
Yeah.
will be from government, one from the private sector for the poor, and I think almost seven are being done by the poor themselves incrementally. So the challenge to them in terms of accessing finance is that, one, they usually live on land which they do not have. They may have, all of them have absolutely bought it and paid for it, but it still legally may not be in their name. So they won't have a legal title. And therefore it will be an informal land. And of course, their incomes also, quite a lot of them are informal. So you cannot actually get a sense of their income. And then housing loans would become housing loans for informal tenure and informal income are the most challenging
Okay.
ones to be, because one, they are longer term, and second, they are also larger size as compared to normal consumer loans.
Okay. So, and there are how does they try to get, because again, affordable housing or housing loans, if they are taking up, they would get into the cycle of debt, or are they able to get out of it easily as well? How are they able to manage that?
So they deploy several mechanisms. So when usually poor take a housing loan,
Yeah.
because it's very hard to come by for them. So
Yeah.
and because people don't lend so easily to them, they deploy a combination of mechanisms. So for a
Okay.
single expenditure on housing, probably they would have borrowed from their family. They would have taken non-loan support from very near family members. They would have sold off their gold, whatever little they
Yeah.
had, and then they would have partly taken a loan from a formal institution, not very easily available. So various, and then some savings that they have done over a period of time. So the money actually comes from various sources, and
Yeah.
it's not a single source. And what they do is, many of them I have seen, especially in cities like Surat, Bombay, would construct. They take it to construct housing on top of the ground floor housing, and then the EMIs they pay by renting out the upper
Mm.
story to
Yeah.
other new migrants who come into the city. So that's a very common phenomena that I have seen. Otherwise, they usually take a loan to improve their own housing, and then it doesn't really pay up. But then the amount of debt they would incur in term vis-a-vis the spending that they have actually made is much lower. So They would then find community networks where sort of borrow informally, where they don't have to pay interest from their relatives, etc. So, and then there is one instrument which is extremely prevalent, which is called a chit fund in the slums. Despite so many MFIs and microfinance institutions working for them, where they enroll themselves into chit funds and then they get a bigger amount every year, so that they are able to utilize it for housing.
So coming to a slightly topic on the adjacent side of it, it is not, but I feel somewhere again where they are built, transport is something which will also affect them a lot in this whole ecosystem, because their work is something might not be at the same spot, and then looking at it from climate's point of view, they are someone who might be able to use the public transport infrastructure in a much better way. So how does that whole role play into account, and what are some of the challenges or opportunities that people have taken up on these lines?
I would say that the biggest challenge, so we had done a small transport survey with the poor women who we were working with, and we were actually working outside of their homes, and we understood that they were spending as large as 100 rupee a day in a center like Ahmedabad, forget Bombay or Delhi, to
Yeah.
commute to their place of work, and obviously 2 hours a day to go back and forth. And that used to be a lot of trip change. So not through a single trip, but taking a lot of trip change and changing vehicles. And obviously, a large part of that also used to be informal transport, like shared auto rickshaws and stuff,
Yeah.
which were of course not very climate friendly. But that was an affordable solution at the doorstep and in the timing that was sort of suitable to them. So while they suffered the most and spent the highest, probably they did not care so much about the climatic emissions that the vehicles were actually giving out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, any on those lines, I would also like to get your thoughts on if anything we have particularly missed out before we move to one of the last questions that we do, uh, from lens of poverty, climate resilience, housing, uh, that the audience should know of.
So I think one thing that is very evident to me is this for urban areas vis-a-vis the rural is the fact that citizens' engagement in urban areas is very very minimal. So when you talk of rural, we have a very strong panchayati raj system and the gram sabhas and their structure, where the poorest of the poor can also actually officially participate, and the participation is easier. But citizens' engagement for good governance in urban areas is actually very very tough. We did have the 74th constitutional amendment in our constitution, which talks of having area sabhas and ward committees at the ward level in cities, but nowhere I find, except for one or two wards in Bangalore, it has been operationalized. And Bangalore also very recently started. So citizens don't have a space for engagement with the government in urban areas. You forget about the poor, because even if the educated and the elite and the middle class find it very complex, then poor it's a completely different story, and that's going to manifest in the way our cities are going to sort of contribute to the problem of climate change, or probably become a proliferation of slums, unless and until we ensure that there are good governance, citizen engagement mechanisms established, it's going to be, the challenge is going to be much tougher.
That surely makes a lot of sense. So, one of the last questions that we do at each end of each episode is on the lines of what are the different skill sets required to, help in this field to make sure that this field can be taken up in a better way for the future. So, if you can elaborate something on those lines, that will be of great help to the audience.
I think the first and foremost is the passion to work in the area. So I would not say so much of skills, but the passion to sort of continue working in urban development space with which asks for a lot of patience, lot of perseverance, and also, a person would be best able to deliver if you understand the intersections of urban development, skilling, climate forward, and then good governance. So you have to understand, how these complex subjects intersect and, sort of contribute towards urban development. So I think it's not a single skill set, but a better understanding of all these intersectional areas, and then of course to have the patience and perseverance to, sort of keep dealing for a long time. It is something that is, I think, the foremost requirement.
I do agree. In urban, like I have been here only in urban development sector for 3 years, and I can see the amount of patience already required to develop anything on policy lines or any kind of recommendations that also needs to come in. So I absolutely agree with that. Thank you so much. If I have missed out on anything and you want to cover it, we can still go. Otherwise, we can end this talk.
That's fine with me. Thank you for calling me. My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Bijal ma'am. This was absolutely a pleasure talking to you and get a very good insight on the aspects that about urban poverty and what is the climate resilience for them and how can that be improved upon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Do subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and follow us on all social media channels. For more details about the Climate Center for Cities and registration on Climate Practitioners India Network, click on the link in the show notes. The episode is conceptualized and produced by Punit Gandhi. A big thank you to the whole team at CQ and NIUA for supporting the development of the podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode.